They mocked her as the bride was auctioned in chains, until a rancher said, "My son needs you." The sun rose high over the small town, sending golden light across dusty streets and wooden buildings. It was a quiet morning at first, with only the occasional sound of a horse's hooves echoing against the empty square. But as the day grew warmer, people began to gather in the town square, drawn by curiosity and a sense of excitement. Rumors had spread for days about an unusual event, one that had never happened before in their town. Some whispered about it as if it were entertainment, while others murmured with unease. Today, a young woman was to be offered at an auction unlike any other, for she was not selling goods or cattle, but herself, though she did not belong to anyone by choice. She was a bride in chains. The woman stood in the center of the square, her wrists bound with iron cuffs and a heavy chain hanging loosely from her neck. Her hair was dark and fell in waves over her shoulders, but it could not hide the tension in her face. Her eyes were wide, scanning the crowd, but she did not show panic outwardly. Inside, however, her heart raced. Fear mingled with anger as she realized the world around her had become a stage for humiliation. People laughed and shouted, some pointing at her, others nudging one another as if she were a curiosity to be judged. It was as if she were invisible in one sense, yet every whisper, every shout, and every sneer seemed aimed directly at her. The auctioneer stood on a small platform, his voice booming across the square. He was a tall man with a quick tongue and a smile that seemed too sharp for his face. He began to speak, calling out her features as if she were an object. He described her youth, her looks, and the qualities that the people in the crowd considered desirable. The woman's lips pressed together, refusing to react to the crude words. She had learned early in life to mask her fear and to survive by holding on to her dignity. Even in chains, she refused to show weakness. The crowd's laughter grew louder as more people shouted bids and jokes. Some made rude comments, and others clapped their hands in encouragement. They treated the event as if it were a game, completely ignoring the human being at the center of it. She could hear the whispers, "She's beautiful, but will she obey? Who will take her first? I wonder if she'll cry." Each word cut, but she did not let the tears fall. She had endured much in her life, and she had learned that showing fear gave power to those who wished to control you. So she stood tall, even though her body ached from the chains. Among the crowd, there were families with children who stared wide-eyed at the strange scene, some unsure of whether it was real or part of some cruel story. There were older men who remembered harsher times and saw it as tradition, even if they did not fully approve. And then, on the outskirts of the square, a figure on horseback watched quietly. He was a rancher, tall and broad-shouldered, with a presence that seemed calm yet commanding. He did not shout or cheer. He did not throw coins or jeer at the woman. Instead, he observed with careful attention, his eyes studying the chains, the crowd, and the young woman herself. He had come to the town for business, to find a bride for his son, but something about the way this woman carried herself made him pause. She was not breaking under the weight of her situation. Her eyes, though anxious, were steady. There was intelligence there, and a quiet strength that few in the crowd seemed to notice. The rancher felt an unexpected respect for her, and he knew instantly that she was not someone to be mocked. He had seen people endure hardship before, but few had the courage to stand tall in the face of such public humiliation. The auctioneer continued his show, calling out bids in rapid succession. Each new offer was met with cheers from the crowd, while she remained still, her hands gripping the chain as though it were a lifeline. He thought about her family, her village, and the circumstances that had brought her here. Poverty and misfortune had forced them into a situation no one should face, and she hated the helplessness that seemed to surround her. Yet, even in her anger and fear, she knew she had to maintain her composure. She could not allow them to see her broken. The townspeople were fully engrossed in the spectacle. Some young men pushed forward, eager to place a higher bid, while older women whispered amongst themselves, commenting on the woman's appearance and her demeanor. They judged her as if she were a commodity, discussing what she could offer to a household. They did not see the human being behind the chains, did not see the stories she carried in her heart, the struggles she had faced, or the dreams she had silently nurtured. In that moment she realized just how alone she felt, surrounded by people, yet completely isolated. Then the rancher moved closer. His horse's hooves made a steady sound against the ground, different from the chaos of the crowd. He listened as the auctioneer spoke, and watched as people shouted their bids. Finally, when the gavel was about to fall for yet another round, he spoke. His voice was calm but carried an unmistakable authority. "My son needs you." It was a moment so sudden that many in the crowd blinked in surprise. Even the auctioneer paused, unsure if he had heard correctly. The woman in chains felt a spark of something she had not felt in hours: hope. She looked at the man on the horse, studying his face. There was no mockery there, no greed, no expectation of obedience. His words were not about ownership or power. They were about choice, about respect, about seeing her as a person, not as a prize. Some townspeople murmured among themselves, confused by the sudden turn of events. "Who is he to speak?" one asked. Another whispered, "Why would he care about her?" But the rancher did not answer them. He simply watched her, allowing her to make the decision. She realized in that moment that this man offered her something she had almost forgotten existed: the power to choose. Her mind raced. Could she trust him? Was this another trap? Another cruel twist? She had seen kindness used as a weapon before, but there was something different here. His calm demeanor, the steady gaze, and the respect in his voice made her consider the possibility that not all men sought to control or humiliate. Perhaps, just perhaps, this was a chance to escape not only the chains of iron, but also the chains of circumstance that had bound her for so long. The auctioneer, sensing the change in the crowd, tried to regain control. He raised his hand and called out, "The next bid," but the words felt hollow. The energy in the square had shifted. People turned to watch the woman and the rancher. For the first time, she felt seen, not as property, but as a human being with thoughts, feelings, and agency. She slowly raised her head, meeting the rancher's gaze. The fear in her eyes was still there, but it was mixed now with curiosity and cautious hope. The crowd continued to whisper and murmur, some still laughing, some still unsure. But the woman knew what she had to do. She could not control their words or their actions, but she could control her own response. She took a small, deliberate step toward the man on horseback, feeling the weight of the chains less as a symbol of confinement and more as a reminder of the choices that still lay ahead. The rancher nodded slightly, as if acknowledging her bravery, and extended his hand to the auctioneer to formally end the bidding. The gavel fell one last time, not with the loud bang of ownership, but with the soft, decisive sound of a choice made. The woman in chains, once the subject of mockery and scorn, now had a path forward, a path not of fear, but of cautious hope. As the crowd slowly dispersed, still murmuring about the unusual turn of events, she felt a strange mix of relief and anxiety. She did not yet know what lay ahead, how her life with this rancher's family would unfold, or what challenges she would face. But for the first time in a long while, she felt that she had a future. The chains were still around her wrists, but they no longer felt like the end. Instead, they felt like the threshold of something new, a beginning she would step into with courage and determination. The rancher guided his horse closer, his presence steady and reassuring. He did not speak again immediately. He allowed her to take the first steps into this uncertain future, understanding that true respect meant giving her the space to decide her own fate. And so, in that dusty square under the blazing sun, a young woman who had been mocked and chained felt the first stirrings of freedom, not the freedom from iron, but the freedom to choose, to hope, and to live again. The moment the rancher spoke, the woman felt the air shift around her. "My son needs you." Simple words, yet they carried weight and authority. The crowd froze for a heartbeat, unsure of what to make of the statement. Some looked at each other with raised eyebrows. A few whispered, questioning the man's sudden intervention. Why would he care for her? One woman murmured. Another shook her head, muttering that this was impossible. The young woman herself blinked, her mind racing with confusion and disbelief. Could it really be true? Could a man actually see her, not as property to mock, but as a person worthy of respect? The chains on her wrists clinked softly as she shifted her weight. Her heart still pounded, but it was no longer just fear. It was curiosity, a fragile spark of hope. The rancher's gaze was steady, unwavering, and kind, something she had almost forgotten existed. He did not speak harshly or demand obedience. Instead, he simply stated a truth that left room for choice, a rare gift in a world that had taken so much from her. She could feel it deep within her chest. For the first time, she was being offered a decision that belonged entirely to her. The auctioneer, momentarily stunned, cleared his throat and attempted to regain control. "Next bid. Come on, next bid." His voice was loud, but it sounded hollow, echoing against the wooden buildings. The townspeople shifted uneasily, some still unsure whether to laugh or remain silent. For a moment, the usual excitement of the auction had vanished, replaced by a tension that hung thick in the air. All eyes were on the woman, and for the first time, she felt that the weight of judgment had lessened slightly. It was no longer only about mockery. It was about something else entirely: respect and the possibility of freedom. The rancher dismounted from his horse with careful, deliberate movements. His boots made a steady sound on the wooden platform of the auction. He did not rush toward her. He did not remove the chains himself, nor did he attempt to command her. Instead, he stood a few feet away, giving her space, his calm presence speaking louder than any words could. He simply waited, allowing her to process the offer and decide for herself. The simple act of patience felt revolutionary to her. In her life, she had been forced into situations without consent, always at the mercy of others' choices. Now, someone was offering her a chance to make her own. Her thoughts flickered to her family, to the people she had left behind in desperation. She had watched her parents struggle to survive, working endlessly in fields and homes that yielded barely enough to eat. She thought about the rumors that had brought her here, the whispers of debt and dishonor that had forced them into this cruel auction. For years, she had carried the weight of others' expectations, the heavy burden of survival, and the sharp sting of judgment. But now, standing in the square with the sun hot on her face, she realized that she could step into something new, something that had not been written by misfortune or cruelty, but by her own choices. The crowd murmured again, this time with a mix of curiosity and disbelief. Some still whispered cruelly, unsure of how to react to this new turn of events. Others looked on with admiration, even secretly wishing they could show the same courage. She could hear fragments of their words. She might actually leave with him. He seems serious. That man knows what he's doing. Perhaps she will find a better life. Their words were a mix of envy, doubt, and admiration. But the young woman did not let them touch her. She focused instead on the man in front of her, on the opportunity that had presented itself in the middle of mockery. Slowly, the woman took a cautious step forward. The chains rattled, and she winced slightly at the sound. But she did not stop. The rancher extended a hand, not toward her body, but as a gesture of respect and partnership. He did not rush, did not command, but waited for her to decide. It was a gesture so simple, yet so powerful, that she felt her chest tighten. The small act of respect and patience was a balm to all the wounds inflicted by fear and ridicule. She placed her hand lightly in his, feeling an unexpected warmth that contrasted sharply with the cold metal of the chains. "Are you willing to come with me?" the rancher asked, his voice calm but firm. There was no pressure in his tone, no urgency, only the truth of his words. The woman hesitated. Fear still lingered, a shadow over her thoughts. What if she was wrong to trust him? What if this was another trap? What if, after leaving the square, she found herself in another situation worse than this one? Yet beneath the fear, she felt a quiet certainty growing. This man's demeanor, his careful attention, and the respect in his eyes told her that this was not about ownership or power. It was about partnership, about seeing her as a human being who could choose her own path. The crowd watched in silence, their chatter dimming as the tension in the square grew. A few children, curious and wide-eyed, peeked from behind their parents, sensing that something unusual was happening. Even the auctioneer paused, uncertain whether to continue, realizing that the usual spectacle of mockery was losing its hold. The air felt charged with a strange energy, a mixture of anticipation and awe, as if everyone present knew that they were witnessing a rare moment of human decency. The woman looked around one last time, glancing at the faces of those who had mocked her, who had laughed at her chains, and who had whispered cruelly behind their hands. Their expressions seemed less important now. Their power over her had diminished the moment the rancher had spoken. She realized that mockery could only touch those who allowed it to. It could only define those who believed they had no choice. And today, she had a choice. For the first time in a long while, the chains around her wrists were not the most important thing. The choice before her was, slowly, deliberately, she nodded. Her lips pressed into a line, signaling acceptance, though her eyes still carried a mixture of caution and hope. The rancher smiled faintly, not with triumph, but with understanding. He gestured to her lightly, signaling that he would help guide her from the square, but that she would remain in control of every step. Together they moved forward, the chains clinking softly, a sound now mixed with possibility rather than only fear. The townspeople, uncertain how to react, whispered among themselves. Some still doubted, shaking their heads at the unusual turn of events. Others began to see the courage in the young woman's eyes, realizing that her dignity had remained intact despite the chains and ridicule. There was a murmur of admiration, quiet but growing, as they witnessed someone reclaiming choice in a world that had tried to deny it. The power of ridicule and mockery seemed to fade with every step she took toward the rancher, leaving only a sense of awe at the quiet strength she displayed. As they walked through the square, the rancher maintained a steady pace, neither rushing nor pausing unnecessarily. He allowed her to lead with her steps, respecting the rhythm of her movement, respecting the silent words her eyes conveyed. There was a mutual understanding forming between them, a bond built not on words but on trust, respect, and the acknowledgement of each other's strength. She had survived mockery, fear, and humiliation, and now she was stepping into something different, a future that held possibilities she had never dared to imagine. Finally, they reached the edge of the square, where the dirt road led out toward the rancher's land. The woman paused, glancing back one last time at the town, the crowd, and the place where she had been mocked. She felt a strange mix of relief, fear, and hope. Relief that the humiliation was behind her, fear of the unknown that lay ahead, and hope that perhaps this journey would allow her to reclaim the life she had always wanted, one of respect, dignity, and choice. The rancher spoke softly, breaking the silence. "You do not have to rush. Take your time. You decide each step." His words were gentle but firm, a reminder that her agency was hers to claim. The woman nodded, a small but determined gesture, acknowledging that she understood. For the first time in years, she felt that her life was not entirely dictated by the whims of others. She could make decisions, face challenges, and shape her own destiny. With a deep breath, she took the first step onto the road leading away from the square. The chains around her wrists clinked, but they no longer felt like a sentence. They were a reminder of how far she had come and how much further she could go. The rancher walked beside her, a steady presence, offering guidance, but never command. And as they moved together, the sun shining on their backs and the wind stirring the dust around them, she realized that this was more than just an escape. It was a chance to live freely, to reclaim her dignity, and to begin anew. The road from the town to the ranch stretched for miles, winding through wide plains and fields that glimmered under the late afternoon sun. Dust rose softly beneath the horses' hooves, drifting lazily in the warm breeze. The woman rode with a mixture of caution and curiosity. Her chains had been removed by the rancher once they were out of the crowd's eyes, though the memory of their weight still lingered in her mind. Each movement reminded her of the moments she had endured in the town square, and the fear of ridicule remained like a shadow at the edge of her thoughts. But alongside that fear was something entirely new, a fragile, fluttering hope that perhaps life could be different. The rancher guided his horse with steady hands, leading her gently through paths she had never walked. He spoke little, letting her process her surroundings, the freedom of the open road, and the sudden shift from humiliation to choice. The woman stole glances at him, curious about the man who had changed her fate with a simple phrase. "My son needs you." Those words echoed in her mind, and she wondered how they could hold so much power. They were not just about a marriage. They were about respect, about seeing her as a person, about offering her an opportunity for dignity. As the sun began to dip lower in the sky, painting the plains with gold and amber, the woman noticed small details along the road. Wildflowers nodded gently in the breeze, and birds flew across the horizon, free in ways she had never truly experienced. She thought of the chains that had once bound her, both physical and invisible, and felt a quiet determination settle inside her. Perhaps freedom was not just about leaving the town behind. It was about stepping into a life where she could make her own choices, no matter how small they might seem. Finally, after hours of riding, the ranch came into view. It was large, built of sturdy timber and stone, with wide verandas that caught the last rays of sunlight. Smoke curled lazily from the chimney, and the smell of wood smoke and earth drifted through the air. Animals moved freely in the distance, horses grazing in paddocks, cows wandering across fields, and chickens pecking at the ground near the barns. The woman's eyes widened at the sight. She had never been anywhere so open, so alive with activity and promise. The ranch felt different from the cramped, dusty town. It was alive in a way that invited her to breathe deeply and imagine possibilities she had long thought impossible. The rancher led her inside the main house, a large but welcoming building with wide windows that let in light and warmth. The furniture was simple but sturdy, and the walls carried the scent of home. Wood, earth and the faint traces of herbs and cooking fires. The woman could feel the calm energy of the place, a stark contrast to the mocking voices and chaos of the auction. The rancher gestured for her to sit, and she complied cautiously, her hand still hovering nervously in her lap. He did not press her to speak, and for that she felt a strange comfort. His silence was not emptiness, it was patience, and it allowed her the space to find her own voice. After a moment, the rancher spoke again, this time with a gentleness that surprised her. "My son will meet you soon," he said, his tone steady. "Ah," he came up. "He is quiet, kind, and hard-working. He respects people, and he will respect you. You do not need to fear him." She nodded, unsure of what to expect. Her mind was a swirl of questions. Would his son be like the men in town who had mocked her? Would he judge her for her past, for the auction, for the chains she had worn? She had learned long ago that people often treated appearances and circumstances as truths without understanding the real person inside. Before long, a young man appeared in the doorway. He was taller than she had expected, with broad shoulders and strong hands, evidence of years spent working the land. His hair was dark, slightly tousled from the wind and sun, and his eyes carried a quiet curiosity. He paused, noticing her hesitation, and smiled faintly. There was no arrogance in his expression, no rush to claim or dominate. Instead, there was a cautious warmth, as if he, too, understood the fragility of first impressions and the need for patience. The woman looked at him, studying his movements, noting the calm steadiness in his stance. She remembered the fear and ridicule of the town square, and a shiver ran down her spine. But she also remembered the rancher's words, "You do not need to fear him." Taking a deep breath, she allowed herself to respond with a small nod. The young man stepped closer, careful not to rush, and introduced himself simply. "I am Daniel," he said. His voice was quiet but clear, carrying a subtle strength that made her feel unexpectedly safe. Daniel gestured toward the open fields visible through the windows. "Would you like to see the land?" he asked. She hesitated for only a moment before nodding again, curious despite her nerves. The two of them stepped outside, the cool evening air brushing against their faces, carrying the scent of earth, grass, and animals. The plain stretched endlessly before them, rolling gently into the distance, with the last light of the day glimmering off the tall grasses. For the first time in her life, she felt that the world was wider than she had imagined, and that she could be more than what circumstances had forced her to believe. As they walked together, Daniel pointed out various parts of the ranch: the barns, the stables, the fields where crops would grow, and the pens where animals were cared for. He spoke with pride, but also with humility, as if he wanted her to understand the work and dedication it took to maintain the land. She listened attentively, her curiosity growing. This world was different from anything she had known, yet she could imagine herself here, learning, helping, and becoming part of something larger than herself. For a long moment, they walked in silence, the kind of silence that was comfortable rather than oppressive. The woman felt her shoulders relax slightly, realizing that she could breathe here, without fear of mockery or judgment. She could think, observe, and respond in her own time. Daniel, sensing her need for space, did not push conversation but allowed her to absorb the world around her, to notice the details, to feel that she was not just an observer, but someone who could belong. Eventually, conversation began to flow naturally. Starting with small observations about the land and the animals, the woman noticed how Daniel treated the horses with patience, speaking gently to them as they walked by. She asked questions, and he answered without condescension, explaining the ways of the ranch with clarity and care. Slowly, the tension that had wrapped her heart in the town square began to loosen. She realized that she could speak, ask questions, and learn without fear of ridicule. This simple recognition of her intelligence and curiosity was liberating. As the evening deepened, they returned to the main house. The sun had dipped below the horizon, leaving a soft glow in the sky and a cool breeze sweeping across the plains. Inside, the warmth of the hearth and the smell of dinner created a comforting atmosphere. The rancher's wife, or perhaps another caretaker, brought plates with food, simple but nourishing, and set them before them. Daniel gestured for her to sit beside him, and she did, feeling a strange sense of belonging for the first time in years. Dinner was quiet at first, the clinking of utensils and the hum of evening sounds filling the room, but gradually conversation grew, small stories exchanged, laughter gently slipping in where tension had once dominated. The woman discovered that Daniel had grown up on this land, learning from his parents, facing hardships, yet always maintaining respect for those around him. He listened carefully when she spoke of her past, though she only shared pieces of her story, careful not to reveal everything too soon. His attentiveness, his patience, and his lack of judgment made her heart soften, building a tentative trust she had not known she could feel again. By the time the meal was finished, a subtle understanding had begun to grow between them. The woman realized that she was not merely a bride in a transaction. She was a partner in a life that could be shared, respected, and nurtured. Daniel, too, seemed to recognize the strength she carried beneath her cautious exterior, and he admired her quietly, without overwhelming her with words or expectations. In this balance, something fragile and beautiful began to take root. Mutual respect and curiosity, the foundation of trust that could grow into something lasting. As the night deepened, the woman looked out the window at the ranch bathed in moonlight. Shadows moved softly across the fields, the animals settled into their pens, and a gentle stillness enveloped the land. She thought of the auction, the chains, the mocking crowd, and realized how far she had come. The fear that had gripped her so tightly was loosening, replaced by a sense of possibility. Perhaps this life on the ranch could be a new beginning, a place where her choices mattered, and where her strength, courage, and dignity could finally be recognized. Before going to rest, Daniel walked her to a small room prepared for her. It was simple, but clean and warm, with a window overlooking the fields. He did not linger unnecessarily, understanding that she needed space, but he offered a gentle smile. "Rest well," he said. "Tomorrow is a new day, and we will face it together." She nodded, a small smile breaking across her face. For the first time in a long while, she felt that she was not alone, that she could trust, that she had the chance to begin again. That night, as she lay on the bed, listening to the soft sounds of the ranch at rest, the woman reflected on the journey that had brought her here. She thought of the auction, the jeers, the chains, and the sting of humiliation. She thought of the rancher, of Daniel, and the unexpected kindness and respect she had been offered. And she realized with a quiet certainty that the world could be kinder than she had ever believed, that people could see value beyond appearances, and that she could claim her own path in life. The night stretched on, calm and reassuring, and for the first time in a long while, she allowed herself to hope. Awoke, the quiet sounds of the ranch greeting her, a rooster crowing in the distance, the soft murmur of horses shifting in their stalls, and the faint rustle of leaves in the wind. She took a deep breath, feeling the cool air on her face, and for the first time she felt that she belonged somewhere, even if only tentatively. The chains of her past, the mocking laughter of the town, and the fear that had gripped her heart were fading, replaced by a new sense of possibility. She dressed quickly and stepped outside, greeted immediately by the sight of wide fields stretching endlessly under the morning sun. The ranch seemed alive in a way she had never experienced before, each sound and movement carrying a rhythm that was both calming and grounding. Daniel was already outside, tending to the horses. He looked up and smiled as she approached, not with expectation, but with quiet warmth. "Good morning," he said simply, his voice steady. She nodded, returning the greeting, and felt a strange sense of comfort in the simplicity of the moment. Breakfast was simple, nourishing, and shared in a quiet routine that felt natural and respectful. There were no questions pressed too hard, no judgments passed, only gentle conversation and small observations. The woman realized how much she had missed this, the ability to interact without fear, to speak and be heard, and to notice the small details of life without constant worry. She learned Daniel's habits, the way he cared for the land, and the subtle ways he ensured everything ran smoothly, not through force or command, but through respect for those around him. After breakfast, Daniel guided her to the fields. "You can help with whatever you feel comfortable with," he said. "We have work to do, but it can be done together." She nodded, feeling a mixture of anticipation and nervousness. Though she had never worked on a ranch before, she was willing to try. She wanted to prove, first to herself and then to those who doubted her, that she was capable of more than survival. She could contribute, learn, and grow. The day was filled with new experiences. She learned how to feed the animals, mend fences, and gather eggs from the hens. Daniel guided her patiently, showing her the ropes without belittling her mistakes. When she stumbled or dropped tools, he simply helped her up and smiled, never making her feel foolish. Each task completed brought her a small sense of pride, a reminder that her strength had value and that her courage extended far beyond simply enduring humiliation. She began to see herself not as a victim of circumstance, but as a partner in something larger than herself. By midday, the woman had grown more comfortable with her surroundings. She noticed the subtle rhythms of ranch life, the way animals responded to care and attention, the patterns of weather and light, and the unspoken communication between people and land. Daniel walked beside her, explaining each task patiently, but also leaving space for her to explore and observe. She realized that this was unlike anything she had known. A life built on collaboration, respect, and mutual understanding, rather than fear, judgment, and ridicule. As the days passed, her confidence grew. She began to anticipate needs, helping with chores before being asked. Daniel noticed, and his respect for her deepened, though he never boasted or drew attention to it. The rancher watched from a distance, proud of both his son and the young woman who had stepped into their lives with courage and determination. The woman, too, began to feel pride, not just in her accomplishments, but in the recognition that her choices mattered, that her efforts had impact, and that she could belong in a community that valued her. Evenings were spent in quiet conversation. She shared pieces of her past cautiously, recounting her childhood, her family struggles, and the journey that had brought her to the ranch. Daniel listened without judgment, his quiet presence encouraging her to open her heart at her own pace. The more she spoke, the more she realized how much strength she had developed through hardship, and how that strength could now be used for growth rather than survival. In return, she learned about Daniel's life, his values, and his dreams for the ranch, finding inspiration in his dedication and humility. Over time, laughter began to enter their days. Small jokes, shared observations about the animals, and playful competition in tasks made life feel lighter. The woman discovered a joy she had almost forgotten, simple, unhurried moments of connection that carried as much value as any grand achievement. She realized that her past, though painful, had shaped her into someone capable of resilience, empathy, and adaptability, and she understood that this new life was not a replacement for what she had lost, but a continuation of her journey on terms she could define. The townspeople who had once mocked her eventually heard of her new life. Some whispered in disbelief, others with admiration. "She is thriving," they said. "She carries herself with dignity and strength." Their voices, though distant, no longer held power over her. She had learned that true respect was earned through courage and character, not given by the judgment of others. And now she carried herself with a quiet assurance, knowing that she was more than their opinions, more than their laughter, more than the chains that had once bound her. As the seasons changed, so did her confidence and sense of belonging. She became adept at the routines of ranch life, developing skills she had never imagined she could possess. She learned to read the skies for weather, to care for the animals with precision, and to manage the daily challenges of maintaining a large property. Daniel worked beside her every step of the way, but never in a way that diminished her contribution. Together, they built not only a functional life on the ranch, but also a partnership based on trust, respect, and mutual appreciation. Their relationship deepened naturally, rooted in shared experiences rather than grand gestures or declarations. The woman recognized Daniel's strength, patience, and kindness, while he admired her resilience, intelligence, and courage. Each day brought new challenges and opportunities to learn from each other, and slowly the foundation of respect grew into a deep understanding and trust. They laughed together, solved problems together, and supported each other through moments of doubt or difficulty. It was a partnership unlike any she had known, grounded not in expectation but in the recognition of each other's worth. One evening, after a long day of tending to the animals and fields, they sat together on the veranda watching the sun dip below the horizon. The sky was painted with shades of pink, gold, and lavender, and the land seemed to glow in the soft light. The woman realized how far she had come. From the humiliation of the auction, the chains, and the mocking crowd, to this moment of quiet peace and connection. She understood that freedom was not just the absence of chains, but the ability to choose, to act with dignity, and to live in alignment with one's values. Daniel glanced at her and smiled, a simple gesture that carried a world of understanding. She returned the smile, feeling a warmth in her chest that had nothing to do with romance, but everything to do with connection, trust, and shared experience. In that quiet moment, she felt the culmination of her journey, not as a story of rescue or ownership, but as a story of resilience, choice, and transformation. The woman who had been mocked and chained had become a partner, a contributor, and a person whose presence mattered. The following week solidified her place on the ranch. She continued to work diligently, learning new skills and gaining confidence in her abilities. Daniel and she worked side by side, their collaboration becoming seamless. Tasks that once seemed overwhelming now felt manageable, and she discovered a sense of pride in her competence. She realized that her strength did not lie only in enduring hardship, but in her ability to adapt, learn, and grow. The ranch became a place of possibility, a space where her past no longer defined her, and her future could be shaped by her own hands. As time went on, their partnership extended beyond daily tasks. They shared stories, laughed at small mishaps, and celebrated successes together. The woman learned to find joy in routine, and Daniel learned to appreciate her perspective, insights, and intuition. The rancher watched with quiet satisfaction as his son and this remarkable young woman forged a connection built on equality, respect, and mutual understanding. He knew that she was not just a bride, but a partner who could strengthen their family, enrich the ranch, and bring her unique courage and wisdom into their lives. One afternoon, as the sun set behind the hills, the woman stood by the fence, watching the animals move about. Daniel joined her silently, and together they admired the land they had worked to care for. She reflected on the auction, the chains, and the fear that had once ruled her life. She realized that the events of the past, though painful, had led her to this place of strength, choice, and hope. She had reclaimed her dignity, found her voice, and discovered that true freedom was as much about the heart and mind as it was about the body. The woman knew that her life had changed forever. She had entered the ranch uncertain and cautious, carrying the weight of fear and ridicule. But she had emerged empowered, respected, and valued. The chains of the auction no longer held meaning. They were a memory of the strength she had always possessed, a reminder that courage, resilience, and dignity could overcome even the harshest circumstances. As night fell over the ranch, the woman felt a sense of peace she had never known. The wind carried the faint scent of grass and earth, the animals settled into their pens, and the stars began to appear, twinkling in the vast sky above. She realized that she had not only found a home, but had also found herself. Her choices, courage, and determination had brought her to this place, and the future now lay open before her, filled with possibility, growth, and hope. The rancher's son stood beside her, offering quiet support and companionship. The woman smiled softly, recognizing the journey they had shared and the trust they had built. She knew that life on the ranch would have challenges, but she also knew that she had the strength, the knowledge, and the support to face them. The young woman who had been mocked, sold in chains, and humiliated had transformed into someone who commanded respect, embraced opportunity, and lived with purpose. In that moment under the vast, starry sky, she understood the true meaning of freedom. It was not simply the absence of chains. It was the ability to choose, to act with integrity, to grow, and to be valued for who she was. And as she looked across the land, at Daniel, and at the life she was building, she knew that she had found not only a home, but a future defined by her courage, resilience, and dignity.